Hello, and welcome to Our American Government. I'm your host, Mr. Samuelson. Last time we were together, we looked at how states get along with each other and what happens when they don't get along so well. Today, we're going to be looking at a lesson on our developing system of federalism. Let's begin at the beginning. During and after the Constitutional Convention, Federalists such as James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton tried to convince the nation of the importance of a strong central government. The Federalists, however, did not want to throw out the existing state governments. They wanted to preserve state powers. However, and importantly, they wanted to make sure that a greater amount of power went to the nation and the national government. Now, the idea of states' rights had been enshrined in the Articles of Confederation, and the states' rights position has always opposed the idea that the federal government should take supremacy over state governments, that state governments would be better at controlling issues that are mostly local issues. The reason why states' rights people believe that state governments are more capable is because they are closer to the people themselves. The idea being that the people of West Virginia are better served by the government of West Virginia than they are by the government in Washington, D.C. Now, this idea and the idea that the states should not be subordinate to the federal government, that they should be able to do whatever they want, states' right position, is a part of many disagreements throughout our history, including being a major part of the United States Civil War. Now, this idea itself is grounded in the 10th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which says the powers not delegated to the U.S. By the Constitution, nor prohibited to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. And when we had a Constitution that did not do much sole delegation or prohibiting, that leaves a wide open door for states' rights. But our federal system has chipped away at that, in part because of the nationalist position. The nationalist position opposes the states' rights position, and that they believe that the national government is well positioned to actually protect the people from the states, that in some instances, state governments might infringe on the rights of their own people, and that a national government would be a good watchdog against these things. They believe that the national government should have the power to act on these issues. Now, one example of that is right down here, the Little Rock Nine. When the desegregation of schools was ordered, Little Rock, Arkansas refused to do so. So the National Guard was called in, and the national government protected the rights of the people from the states. Another example is the pooling of resources. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, is funded by our federal government, and it goes to hard-hit disaster areas. For example, when Hurricane Katrina hit Louisiana, it created so much damage that Louisiana never would have been able to manage that themselves. So federal money was pooled to go help the state of Louisiana. This is part of the nationalist position. A strong national government is able to do these things. Now, the powers of the federal government have not always been so strong, but a flexible constitution has allowed for the growth of national powers over time. Now, the most important part of the Constitution that allows this is the necessary and proper clause of Article 1. This, if you remember, is sometimes called the elastic clause because it allows the power of government to stretch. Once a government has additional powers, very rarely do they go back and give up those powers. So every time they stretch it, they tend to keep those new powers. Now, they've done these in three major ways. They've stretched their powers for war powers, for regulation of trade, and in taxation and spending. And we're going to look at each of those three. Let's begin with war. The government is involved in education and the economy. And the interesting way that they argue that the government should be involved in education and the economy is they argue that we need a smart, economically strong country in order to compete militarily. that if our school systems fail and our economy fails, then our military will be consequently weak and not able to defend our nation. And so they can use the war powers argument to intervene not just in the military, but in other areas as well that feed into a strong army. On trade and commerce, managing commerce or interactions with people involving money has allowed the US government to do other things, such as protect against discrimination. Businesses can't say that we're not going to hire African Americans because they're African American. By managing commerce and the Commerce Clause of the US Constitution, the US government has said, no, you don't have the power to say that. You have to have equal hiring policies. A third way is in taxes. Once a constitutional amendment was passed that allowed for a federal income tax, our national government saw a flood of money. Now, this was done during World War I times when the federal government needed to expand its war powers to manage other things involved in our economy, but never went away. And now the federal government has a lot of income and a lot of spending, and that spending gives them additional power. One of the big things that our federal government does with its spending is give aid to states. So a lot of the money brought in to the national government goes back to our states. It's redistributed to those states through grants. So there's a pool of money. Federal government says, all right, who needs this money? How much do you need it? What are you going to use it for? And the states apply for it. And based upon that need and upon that usage, and based upon a number of other things, including what they agree to do in return for the money, states are then granted money back. Now, on that chart, you can see what percentage of a state's income comes from the federal government and where that ranks them. For example, if you were to look at Michigan, Michigan has 32.8% of its total budget coming from the federal government, which ranks them right near the middle at 23. The state that gets the most money from the federal government is Mississippi. They're number one because they need a lot of federal aid in order to function. Now, this generally flows from the wealthy states to the poorer states. The poorer states need more money. Mississippi is the poorest state. But the states have to agree to certain conditions. So this gives the federal government more control over state policy. Now, preemption laws is another way that our federal government interferes or influences with state policy. This allows the government to take over certain state functions and enforce certain federal policies on states. It forces the states to meet federal guidelines. For example, the Americans with Disabilities Act falls into this category. If you are building a new building in a state, anywhere in the US right now, it has to have handicap access or wheelchair access. That is a federal law, and states do not have the power or the authority to ignore that. So it's going to cost extra money to put in these ramps to all your buildings. A state might think that that money is better spent on other issues, but they no longer have the authority to spend that money in another way. They've been preempted. States' rights supporters really dislike this idea. They believe that they should be able to determine the best use of money within their state and spend it how they want. Next time we get together, we're going to look at how politics factors into all this as we examine the popularity of our system of federalism and how it shifts according to political views. Thank you for joining me for Our American Government, and farewell.